What's up, everyone? Welcome to Simulation. We are going to be talking about our thoughts on Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is a very interesting man. He provided the co-founder of PayPal, co-founder of Palantir, provided the first outside investment into Facebook. He has invested into so many different companies, including Seasteading, which is building cities in the ocean near the coast, also into vegan pet food startup Wild Earth. He is a proponent of nationalism, a supporter of Donald Trump, so he's very skeptical of globalism in many ways. He has touted around the Bay Area monoculture slogan, which comparing it to North Korea in very interesting ways. He's the author of 0 to 1, which is one of the greatest business books of all time. And so this is a very long intro about Peter Thiel, but it's super fascinating, all the different work he's done. So let's jump into some of the things that we're going to talk about. And I'm going to flip over a timer to give us better perspective on time. So let's do this. So let's talk about some of the first. So he definitely had a major rocket forth in PayPal. So this photo here kind of gives you, it's a little hard to see, but it's the photo of the PayPal mafia. And it's this group of gents that kind of put together the basic infrastructure for being able to send payments electronically. And there were so many other people working on this, and now PayPal also has all these other competitors in the transaction space. But this was a big deal for making internet payments, was PayPal. And then through this exit, he was able to do things like then fund, be Facebook's first outside investor, and then also fund his own investments into these other companies, and then into Palantir as well. And Palantir is a very interesting company because I don't think we talk enough about what data fusion software is, but that's exactly what Palantir does, is they do data fusion. So you see here what I'm highlighting on their website. They talk about scale, speed, and agility, building products that make people better at their most important work. And so back-end infrastructure for integrating, managing, and securing data of any kind, analytical applications, interact smooth with data, and for any data problem. And so some of the big things here that are, it's very difficult to find this sort of stuff, mentioned, but it's difficult to find this sort of stuff mentioned because a lot of what Palantir does is done for data fusion for governmental agencies, and that is used by places like the NSA, places like your San Francisco Police Department or New Orleans Police Department, Chicago, New York Police Departments, etc. And the general idea is this predictive crime analytics. And that's one of many things. I know very little about Palantir, but what I can tell you is that it's very difficult to find information about Palantir, and rightfully so. And I think I have friends that work at Palantir, and it's been very difficult for me to talk to them about what they do, and they kind of very much so make it difficult for me to understand better what is going on. But law enforcement agencies, this is kind of, it's a big deal, and I could spend a whole freaking thoughts on episode talking about just Palantir, but just to understand, it's like taking all of this crime analytics of, let's say, the Chicago area, and seeing that the individual in the Chicago area has a certain criminal history, they're geolocated in a certain location, they're posting these certain things on their social media accounts, they're in this location next to this other person that they've previously committed a crime near or around. So that way police can come and make an intervention before people get hurt. So before people get hurt, this is a big deal, but it's also kind of a little bit Big Brother-esque. And so the general idea with Palantir is that if you mix together some data fusion of this Big Brother-esque stuff with something like a Boston Dynamics in terms of those amazingly physical robots that can do so much different work right now, backflips and stuff, super interesting, and then throw a little rifle or pistol onto them and have millions of them, there is some sort of a dystopian image there. Not saying that that is what's happening, I'm just saying that it's important to talk about these things, at least so that we can ethically steer away from them. So anyway, think about that just for food for thought. Palantir is an interesting company, hopefully saving lives, making people's jobs easier through the structure of data, but at the same time, let's talk about some of the ethics, the Big Brother-esque stuff. Let's figure some of that stuff out. So That's a little bit about, about Palantir. Then something else that's really interesting is the Thiel Fellowship. I thought I mentioned that. Maybe I didn't as we were talking. But the Thiel Fellowship really takes an alternative approach to education. So rather than seeing education as just you go until you're 18, and then when you're 18 you go to college for 4 years, and then you do that, and that's how it goes, that's your process. Peter Thiel's talking about how do we just flip the whole system on its head? How do we unleash the creativity and unlock the creativity out of the youth at younger ages? And that sort of creativity has the potential, those ideas have the potential to impact millions and billions of people and not go through the collegiate system, which is in many ways good, but in many ways also cancerous. And so this is a really fresh take on it. And so boom, just like that, $100,000, 2 years, go and execute this idea, go and get it done. Vitalik Buterin was one of the many people that Peter Thiel has taken out and unleashed, and he's the founder of Ethereum. So he's been right. He's made some really good calls in this sense. And I think he does a pretty good job at explaining here why. A different path for everyone. Freedom to get stuff done. Our network is yours. These are pretty important pillars. And so I think he also writes about this quite a bit in 0 to 1. If you guys haven't seen 0 to 1 yet or read it, I highly recommend reading 0 to 1. This is what the book cover looks like. Notes on startups or how to build the future. And we talk about building the future all the time on here, on the show. And so one of the big, a lot of this was based on Thiel's Stanford University class on startups that he was teaching back in the spring of 2012. But what's really amazing about this book, in my opinion, is that it talks about how to both unlock your fullest potential and creativity, and don't just do it in terms of don't become the 10th restaurant in your tiny little neighborhood because there's 10 other restaurants just in your neighborhood and there's tons of competition. Don't enter fields that have lots of competition, but rather enter fields that don't have any competition. Make brand new fields, start a monopoly, and that is the way to really rocket yourself forward into the world. Build something of value and find those creative potentials. And also, when you go from 0 to 1, that means you take something that didn't have an idea, and a 1 is when you've made that idea into the world. And then when you go 1 to many is when you take an idea that somebody brought from 0 to 1, and then you take that 1 and distribute it to many people, like globalization. And so Peter's really keen on the 0 to 1 side of things, but also the globalization part's crucial. On our show yesterday with David Eagleman, our live event, we were talking about the genealogy of ideas, as in ideas have been around for so damn long, and we're constantly bending, breaking, blending these ideas over time. So that's a bit about 0 to 1 as well. Just really interesting genius there. I really like that a lot. And then I want to talk about some of his investments as we go. This one's really interesting. This is called the Seasteading Institute. I'm a big fan of this myself. The general idea is that you can take and build colonies or civilization inside of the oceans near the coasts. And so when you take a look at some of these designs, I mean, they're very beautiful. The idea is that you can have a sustainable community living there, and that means solar panels, gardens. You got to figure out a way to desalinate the water. You got to figure out, or it's so beautiful. We've seen images of beds that have been underneath of the water in glass compartments. So you're literally laying and you see the fish swimming by you and stuff. It's so beautiful. At night, there's no light pollution, so you get this beautiful, all the light from the galaxy and the universe just shining on your eyes. So yeah, all these different examples of what these like seasteading colonies could look like are just so magnificently interesting and diverse and fascinating. I think it's important to explore this as humanity to see what this would also be like. So another one is Wild Earth, which is a vegan pet food company. Shout out to Ryan Bethencourt, Ron Shigeta, our friends that started that. And he recently invested into that, just like I think 2 weeks ago or so, which is huge. And it's interesting how his investments are diversified in that sense. Now, on the way out, I want to mention sort of this idea of the Bay Area monoculture. I'm going to pull up, just a Google search here is Bay Area monoculture, and there's like Peter Thiel said, he's ditching Silicon Valley and going to LA. He's made it very clear that that Silicon Valley is an intolerant place. and that's funny that there's this link, Palantir knows everything about you, by Bloomberg at the bottom. But just in general, this idea that Silicon Valley's become a monoculture, I've been trying to explain this for a while. And we actually just did it on our last episode with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is we mentioned how in Nebraska, there is a conservative monoculture that's going on at these live events and stuff. And so it's very difficult to be a liberal or a progressive because it's a 99-1. You're constantly getting shut out. Whereas in the Bay Area, it's a hyper liberal and socialist monoculture. So it's very difficult for someone that's a conservative to voice their opinion because they immediately get shut out. So basically what happened was Peter Thiel supported Donald Trump. And everybody was like, what? How is that possible? No way. And Peter Thiel's gay as well, which is very interesting. And so he chose to support Donald Trump. People freaked out about that. And then he understood better about this whole idea of intolerance, that there's intolerance for ideas that the day after Donald Trump was elected, we went out into the streets and we started asking random people, do you think Trump possesses any good characteristics? We were honestly trying to just get really interesting thoughts from people. And the general idea that people were calling him Hitler and all this other kind of stuff. And then there were some people that were saying that, no, it was really interesting to have somebody in business take over the position of president. So just this general notion that it is important to not have a monoculture, that when it's a 99-1, you're literally throttling people's ability to speak and have these Copernicus moments potentially. Again, Copernicus was the one that said that the Earth does not at the center of the universe, but rather the Earth orbits just around the star. The star doesn't orbit the Earth. And so again, everybody thought against that, but he was right. I'm not saying that Peter Thiel is right in this sense, but I'm saying that it's important to not shut people out because they could be right in these Copernicus moments so much, these black sheep moments. So the globalization is currently a hot button topic that Peter Thiel is currently teaching as well. And I want to showcase this, which is the fact that he's actually teaching a course called Sovereignty and the Limits of Globalization and Technology. And he's teaching that at Stanford, and that's happening in the spring of 2019. And I just want to address some of these points here. Current opposition to globalization is emerging in many countries in the various forms of populism, restrictive trade policies, protest parties, and localism, accompanied by appeals to national interests and cultural traditions. So this idea of state sovereignty and the way that markets move and economics move and the way that nationalistic tendencies can maybe help in the short term flourish certain areas in genetic engineering or artificial intelligence or robotics or whatever, but as well as globalize maybe in the long run or figure out how different entities across the world can work together as countries to make sure that there is no robotic warfare, or AI warfare, or bio warfare, etc. But this is very nuanced and multidisciplinary and multivariate, so it's very difficult to actually be able to pinpoint these individual variables and call them binary, but there's so much nuance, which makes globalization and nationalism very difficult to understand. But Peter Thiel's going to be breaking it down, his perspective on it. I do think a lot in the cosmic perspective, so I look at the moon looking down at Earth, and I do realize that in the long run, we're going to have to figure out how to work together on this planet and the next rock. So anyway, this is important stuff to realize that, there's all this conversation that's going on across all these different topics with who Peter Thiel is and what he's up to. I think a lot of people don't realize that necessarily about him. And I think it's important to tune into who he is at a deeper level and understand kind of his mind and the workings of his mind and why he cares about the Thiel Fellowship, taking people out of the collegiate system and into entrepreneurship, why he cares about things like building ocean colonies or things like globalization, things like Palantir and data fusion, 0 to 1, having those creative moments and unlocking them, building monopolies, etc. So thank you everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been some thoughts on Peter Thiel. Please go check out more of our work and support us. Subscribe, comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Join us on Patreon to help us sustain and continue being able to produce more of this content. We'd greatly appreciate that. And thank you, Ron, our producer and director. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Much love. Peace.